Revelation 2106. From the 10th of October 1941. Falling away from God. Returning to the primordial power. Nothing is permanent, everything that is visible to the human eye passes away. But the inner life of it is imperishable, for it is spirit from the Spirit of God. It emerged from God's strength and must inevitably return to God's strength again. It must join, it must unite with the original strength because it once wanted to detach itself from it. But a detachment from the original power is not possible insofar as the power of God is not divisible. But their will to detach itself from it existed, and therefore the will must first desire unification in order to then also be regarded as having returned to the original power. The spiritual, which came into being out of the power of God and the wrong will of the opponent of God, were beings, which likewise carried free will and the consciousness of an individual being in themselves. They had emerged out of the love radiation of God and were originally supposed to be infinitely happy as perfect beings. They were supposed to carry the divine, the love will, likewise in themselves and again create and form it. But their creator's wrong will also placed the wrong will into these beings, and consequently the beings which were supposed to be full of light changed into beings of darkness. Everything in them changed into the opposite. Love changed into hatred, the being became arrogant and domineering, it did not seek to please but desired. Everything divine turned into the demonic, and thus God-opposing beings were the product of the being's wrong will, which God once destined to be the bearer of light. The return of these beings to the elemental power could therefore only be possible through a change of will. The wrong will had to change and turn back to the one from whom it had once turned away. Initially the being did not change its will but decided in favor of its creator. And therefore the will of the being became bound. It could no longer use its free will and had to remain in a kind of constrained state until the will decided to engage in an activity which it had once rejected. Until it served with love where it had once wanted to rule without love. The forced envelopment now offers this beingness the entire creation, which only came into being for the purpose of banishing the God-rejecting beingness. These creations, which are visible to the human eye, will constantly pass away, that is change as long as they contain the beingness within them, which must govern the course of higher development in them. But the progressive development can only be achieved by dissolving and passing away of the outer form, for only then does this form release the spiritual. But the spiritual longs for its release from the form, for its original state was freedom and it feels the lack of freedom as torment. The desire for freedom now also determines its will to submit and to do what is demanded of it. And thus the will, which was once opposed to God, slowly turns towards God, albeit in a certain state of compulsion, yet the final test of will is put to the being in its last embodiment as a human being on earth, where free will is returned to it so that it can use it to make a free decision. And this free decision determines its life in eternity. The final return to God is left up to him, as is the renewed apostasy from God. And God only intervenes in this final decision insofar as he gives the being all conceivable possibilities to attain realization and also imparts unmeasured strength and grace to it if the being is willing to accept them. However, the being itself has to make the final decision if it wants to reach the most luminous state again, which was destined for it from the beginning. Amen.